Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Tom Guo, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having me.
I guess we should start with how you and I know each other. We have really fascinating lives at the same company. We work at the same company. We don't have to get into any details unless you want to. But let's just say you have a highly technical background, which we can explore if that's where we want to go. And I have a decidedly non-technical background.
Yeah, I think that's. I don't actually know if that's true. I've never asked that question of you, but I mean, very simplified. I basically handle a lot of internal applications for our internal teams at the company we both work at, Qualify, mainly for sales, operations, and marketing. And That's primarily on the Salesforce platform, and that's where my expertise lies. So pretty straightforward from that perspective.
Yeah, I think both the sales team and the operations team are very glad that you exist at Qualify.
Much appreciated.
Cool. All right. So I think part of my reasoning, well, a couple of things. I wanted to talk to you because you're a decent, thoughtful guy, and who doesn't like talking to decent, thoughtful people? But you also have a background that I don't think I'll ever stumble into anybody with a similar background as yours. And so let me say what I mean. You are Chinese ethnically.
Mm-hmm.
You were born and raised or just raised in South Africa?
It's a bit complicated, but
let's get into it. We got about an hour, so
we got about an hour. And I'll actually go back to saying you said like you don't think you'll ever meet someone like me, but I disagree. I think the world is changing a lot, and I've met more people like me than I realized.
Okay.
And at the core of it, I don't think my story is that unique, honestly.
So you're talking to a guy from Central Virginia, Tom, and when I meant unique for you, I also meant the qualifier of you moved to the U.S. as a teenager for a sport. Like once you throw that in there, I think it makes you pretty darn unique.
Well, we'll get into that. Sure. So I tell people I was born and raised in South Africa because if I tell them I was born in a country inside South Africa called Lesotho, it kind of wrangles their brain. And for most people, they mispronounce Lesotho as Lesotho. But Lesotho is I think one of the few countries that is completely surrounded by another country. I think the other one is the Vatican.
Yep. And
Lesotho is a country. It's formerly known as the Kingdom of Lesotho, and it's known for two things. It's agriculture economy and diamonds. Some of the biggest diamonds in the world are mined there. So, and I think if my memory presents itself, it's basically has a patch of South Africa where they get fresh water for like mining rights as well.
Wow.
So my parents moved from China to Lesotho as part of kind of like a government relationship pact back in the 80s. And I think this was to foster relationships between the two countries. And this was right when China was opening up. I think it was like Mao dies, country opens up, and they realize we need to foster better relationships so that the economy does better. And so somehow both my parents didn't know each other, met in Lesotho. Both are Chinese. And what is it, like a few years later, I'm born in Lesotho. And from there, the jump to South Africa is an interesting jump because, as you say, I'm Asian. That's most people have the assumption like, oh, you're Asian, you must be from Asia. But I'm like, oh yeah, kind of my background is really just South Africa. And so, like during the year 1990 or 1991, I forget, Lesotho went through a period of big xenophobia. So rushed, like coursed through, like there were huge riots. People were going through the streets, like smashing windows, store windows and whatnot. And at the time, my dad, who was basically works with the Queen of Lesotho, and she basically said, Michael, which is my dad's name. She's like, Michael, you need to leave. You need to take your family and leave. This is really not safe for you. And so she basically gave my dad a truck, like a little Nissan truck, like gave it to him, and basically had the army escort us through to the border. And that was our entrance into South Africa.
That's unbelievable, Tom. And shame on me for not knowing that about you, because that's an incredible story. I'm having a tough time wrapping. So he worked for the Queen.
He worked for the Chinese government, and basically had a relationship with the family. And at some point they were just like, this is not a tenable situation for you guys. This is like personal safety hazard. So so that's how we entered South Africa.
So how old were you when that happened?
I was about 1. So
you don't have memories of it, I imagine.
No. It's funny. Like I would say the story of my life is like the story of my parents, obviously, like just doing the kind of just like throwing themselves into just this unknown, like going to a different country and whatnot, and basically trying to make the best of the situation. So kind of those early years, so is really their story, like it's fascinating to see like, especially from where I am sitting right now. Like I'm in DC, I have a really good quality of life. I have high education. My wife's a lawyer, and just to see that trajectory of our lives, because the moment they crossed the border, they had like, and I think in those days, like $10 to their name, and basically a truck, which is probably more than most people have, honestly. But they basically went from that to then they started selling fruit on the side of the road, Then they started an import-export business, and then they were able to send their children there. So I'm one of 3 kids to one of the best schools in South Africa, and then also fund schooling in America. So I think it's kind of amazing what they've been able to accomplish.
It's unbelievable, right? Imagine what your parents were thinking as they were driving into South Africa with $10 and that truck. And it sounds like they're fantastic parents, right? Not, I think let me be careful here. Most parents want nothing but the best, and they will do anything they can to realize that. But the level of change that your parents experienced as parents of very young kids to what you guys were doing by the time you were teenagers is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you say that, because I think as we get older, we start recognizing that our parents aren't perfect human beings. And it's funny, yeah. As I get older, the more I think that's the case, because they throw problems into my lives. But I think maybe their strengths in like really pushing for everything for their children is maybe like is definitely what set me up for everything that I have right now. So
yeah, I know you're a grateful person, and I'm happy to hear that part of your story, Todd. It's unbelievable. So can we go back to the xenophobia? Was that something that was unique to Lesotho at the time, or I imagine there was some of that in South Africa as well?
I don't actually know. Like I probably misspeak about the topic, honestly. But I don't think that's something that's particularly unique, especially as an Asian person. I think like a lot of like xenophobia is experienced everywhere, and I think back then it was still the same. And even growing up in South Africa, I mean, South Africa is known for apartheid and like the division, and even now when I go back to South Africa, you still are. Being Asian is very, very like shocking for whatever reason. But yeah, xenophobia still exists everywhere.
Yeah, I imagine when you were a kid, you constantly felt like and were reminded that you were Asian and didn't look like most of the folks you encountered, and you grew up with, I imagine, a culture that was different than the typical culture back then for South Africans.
Yeah, I grew up during a weird time. So when I was first eligible to go to school, let's just say like grade 1 or grade 0 is what we call it. I'm not actually quite familiar with the elementary middle school here in the States as much.
Kindergarten was, I think, was what we call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So right when I was eligible to do that, we were in the capital at that time, a city called Pretoria in South Africa. And so my parents took me. So at that time, schools were divided into Afrikaans schools, so the white schools, and your regular schools where everyone technically could go. But it was a division of black and white. And so when I was taken to the schools, I basically wasn't. The white schools wouldn't take me, and the black schools wouldn't take me.
What?
It was just like, where do you fit on the spectrum, you know? And it was weird because so if we back up a few years, my parents, who were really busy trying to make a living, had taken me. We had a neighbor. We had two neighbors, husband and wife, who basically were retired, and they took me in to just take care of me during the day. And that's how I know how to, like, they taught me how to speak Afrikaans, which is the native white language, which is like, it's almost like a derivative of Dutch. Mm. And so one of the requirements to get into the Afrikaans school was you needed to speak Afrikaans. And I spoke Afrikaans, like, better than I spoke English. So they were like, yeah, but he doesn't really fit the what we want. And then I went to the black schools, and they were like, and his English isn't up to par. So they were like, okay, what do we do with this kid? So at the time, there was this school that had just opened up called Crawford Preparatory School. And Crawford, previously Carmel, is like has Jewish origins. Mm. So basically my entire time in South Africa, I went to a Jewish school, and because that was the only institution that would have me.
Because the Afrikaner wouldn't take you, the white school wouldn't take you, and the black school wouldn't take you.
Exactly. And at least in the area that I was in.
And so you spoke Afrikaans, English, and was there Mandarin spoken?
Yeah, I spoke Mandarin because of my parents. And then later on, I kind of just got more like African languages, but those are my three primary languages growing up.
And they couldn't be any more different than each other, right? I mean,
they really couldn't,
right?
I mean, like Afrikaans and English, you can probably like see similarities, but yeah, they're at their core very different.
That is wild. Do you speak all three today?
I only English and Chinese is what I still speak. I think I officially left South Africa probably like almost 20 years ago now. So I can still understand it, but when I try speaking it, it's like, I'm like, oh boy, it's not. It's like, I think it's like you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So you end up going to Crawford is the name of it?
Yeah, exactly.
You end up going to Crawford. What was that experience like?
Crawford was, I only have fond memories of it, honestly. Like, I think it was maybe the best of the worlds that I encompassed at the time. I shouldn't say I never really felt outside or excluded. But I felt the most accepted where like anywhere as I could be, given that time.
Were you the only Asian kid your age at
Not
that
at
school?
all. Not at all.
Okay.
I mean, we had like Crawford was cool because it had the Jewish kids. It had the I should categorize this as Crawford is not a cheap school in South African terms. Like my parents paid a lot more money to send me there, but that was like their only option. So you had the Jewish kids, you had the white kids, and they were all from pretty affluent families, given the situation, and the African kids as well. And then there were a handful of Asian kids as well. So not really, pretty diverse crowd. And then all the diplomats, so we would send their kids there as well. So very diverse crowd.
Diverse ethnically, but maybe not so diverse socioeconomically or economically. It sounds like it.
I would say so. That's probably correct. Yeah.
Have you ever asked your parents why they stayed? Are they there now?
Yeah, they're still there. My brothers are still there.
Did you ever ask them why they didn't go somewhere else?
You mean
like move to another part of Africa or move to Europe or Asia or wherever?
I have no idea, actually. You mean like the decision to leave after they went to South Africa, right?
I mean, they go to South Africa. It just happened to be the country that surrounded the country they went to in the first place. It's happenstance, right? I mean,
it's happenstance, but it's also at a time like when we look at China right now, it's not the China of like 30, 40 years ago. China was a very different place back then. And to them, it was, I think, it was like, okay, we can make a life for ourselves here. And my dad is from a family of so he's the oldest male in his family, which puts him in like a vaulted status and one of responsibility. And he has 5 other siblings. And so he was able to, during this time, not only make a living, support us, but also send money back home.
Oh, wow.
So there was a lot of opportunity, I think, from his perspective.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think over time, it's just something that's just like, I often nowadays, my dad is like pretty much retired at this point. And I ask him like, why don't you leave? And he always gives me like weird responses, etc. But I don't think he can actually leave. He's so ingrained into his expectations of what a house looks like in South Africa, like his access to the different things that are available in South Africa. He just wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. Like my dad is he likes having very like high quality food at his hands. So he can literally go to the local supermarkets, and he usually goes to the wholesalers because I don't know, that's what he does. And he's able to get like just the freshest fruit at bargain prices. And he constantly reminds me, like for the price I paid for one mango, he literally has an entire box of mangoes back home. and their tier is so much better. So
it sounds like it's familiar. He's I imagine this is true for your mom as well. They figured out how to make a good life for themselves, and why change that?
Yeah, I think there is an element of that, and then there is also this pull that you're just like, but like things change, like countries change, they become unstable, and then you kind of have to leave.
Yeah.
So that's the current pull that we're trying to like get my family out of the country.
Is it unstable today? I haven't been following anything.
I would say it's pretty unstable. I was there in December, and I try to go back every 4 years or not, but this was the longest stint that I had been. I had been back for about 7 years, and I think like 7 years ago, South Africa had just instituted this program where they were basically instituting mandatory power outages every day.
Wow.
So it was like, yeah, no big deal. Half an hour here, half an hour there. And it seems like every year they've instituted a layer of outages higher. And I think now they're at something called like tier 6 or something, which is basically 12-hour outages every day. And I'm just like, guys.
Yeah, that's not the developed world, right? The developed world has power 24 hours a day.
Exactly. And I was like, when does the other shoe drop? Like I understand like people are very, very resilient and can kind of deal with anything. But I feel like given our opportunities and what we have, we can probably ask for something better, especially for them long term.
Yeah. Have they visited you here?
Yeah, they have.
Yeah. So they have a general feel for the place, but they don't know what it's like to live here for 6 months or 3 years or
exactly. And and it's always funny seeing media portrayal of the States in every other country. Like if you look at how the States is portrayed, and we should not get into this because it's off topic, but it's very funny for me that the way South Africa portrays what the US is like, what China portrays the US is like, it's like you're describing completely two different countries.
Right.
But it's hilarious seeing the differences and the focuses.
So with instability comes, I imagine, pretty high crime rates. That alone would cause me to want to seek another place to live. That's not enough to get your parents to seriously think about leaving.
I don't know. I mean, high crime rates. Well, let me take a step back. It's like high crime rates have always been a thing. One of the defining characteristics of South Africa is that almost every house has a wall around it, like a big fence
For security.
And like the house I grew up when I was young had a huge wall surrounding our property, not only barbed wire but an electric fence on top of that.
So that was normal.
That was completely normal. And then if you were really, really, and then also it's like every single house is armed with like armed response, like, and it's like, how fast can that armed response get to you? Is it like a minute, 10 minutes? That's something that you look for when you look for like armed security or like just a security system.
Yeah, that doesn't translate in America.
Yeah, that doesn't translate. And I think that has to be explained when you go visit South Africa. Be like, hey, why does everyone have a wall around their house? But I mean, I think at least when I was there, I don't know if it's the way right now. Actually, I do know, but the unemployment rate has always been stupidly high for what you call like the most developed country in Africa. So I think it's like officially, well, I remember it being like somewhere like 30% officially. And then unofficially, it's probably higher at like 42% or something. And then you have that. And then you have the issue of like it being bordered by countries that are in a worse economic position. So you have a lot of inflow of people who don't have jobs coming from those countries into a country where the job opportunities aren't that much. So how else do you make a living other than turn to crime in a lot of those situations? So
yeah, you and I have lived fortunate lives to date, it sounds like. And but if I needed to feed my kids or feed myself, I would commit crimes to feed them.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of your question was like, why don't they leave? It's probably because they're, at least for my parents, they know they can make a life there. They know there are areas where they're competitive. And what they would consider a return on their time is probably greater there than anywhere else. I think my understanding of like peers that aren't as stable is that there is this element of the greater the risk, the greater the reward. So like, like we're happy in the States if we can get like, I don't know, like 3% return. Well, what is the Bank of America pays like no interest on your account?
Yeah.
You know, like there it's like 8%. I don't know. I don't think that's actually aligns with it because that's a lot of different. There's a lot of different nuances there.
Yeah, that's probably, you could write a thesis on that topic. Probably the how the different economies of the world function and how they play with each other as well. All right. So when you were at Crawford and you went there, grade 0 through
right through when I came to America. So grade 10.
Grade
so
10.
So a sophomore year, 10th grade.
Got it. So you were there for a long time. You said the experience was wonderful. Were you thinking the people that you went to school with? Were you thinking academics? Were you thinking athletics? Were you thinking other things that were available at Crawford that weren't available at other schools? What was in your head when you said it was a good experience?
It was a good experience just because like I got to do what I got to do. And looking back, I had great teachers, some of the best teachers in my life. Yeah. I mean, education was extremely solid. I had made some really good friends. Yeah, it's hard. There was really no negative experience in that, in there. So,
were athletics important?
Yeah, athletics is athletics is always very important. I think in South Africa there are the sports where you can walk. The things that are very focused upon are rugby and cricket. Nowadays it's a bit different. At Crawford it was particularly cool because we had a bunch of like the swimming program was insane. Like we had a bunch of people that I grew up who I know like who went to the Olympics or went to the Olympic trials. And there's this guy named Cameron van den Berg who basically is like the face of that program and is an Olympian and I think has won medals as well.
Wow.
So sports are incredibly important. And I think kind of going back to like fitting in and whatnot, like I'm by nature kind of a shy guy. Don't really like was never part of a household where you like spoke your opinions and whatnot. So the way to be for me, who's kind of just like Asian who's a bit different to begin with, the way to kind of, and it's funny the way I rationalize it, but the way to kind of be accepted was to kind of just excel at things. And that's probably a very typical manner in which you think you might get accepted. So it was like academics and tennis for me. That was kind of like the way I feel like I got some like small street cred at the school.
Oh, I imagine you did. A lot of kids who feel like they don't fit in, but then really focus on a couple of things, tennis and academics in your case. Were you accepted or fit in more thoroughly and easily through tennis or through academics?
Honestly, I probably was known more for my academics at the school because the tennis program at the school was pretty weak to begin with. So a lot of my tennis activities happened outside of the school. And like people knew I played tennis and whatnot, but it was the academic achievements they saw. And that didn't really, like the academics didn't really ramp up. I think when I was like in 6th grade or something, I kind of just made a decision. I was like, yeah, I'm going to take this seriously for whatever reason. It probably was something silly. I saw like the award ceremony one day and I got kind of jealous. I was like, I want to be like that one day.
That's why they have those award ceremonies.
I know, right? I know. And that's literally, I think, like from 6th grade until like the moment I left, I kind of was just like on a mission to just like do really well in academics. And so like, I think like, it's funny. My mom, one of my mom's proudest moments is when literally in 7th grade, they had basically this, they basically had the thing. And 7th grade is, I think, the delineator between, for us, between like middle school and high school. Like 8th grade is when high school starts. And I basically just walked across the stage and took pretty much every award. And she was like, yeah, that's awesome. And I was really ecstatic. But on the flip side of that, I think I just got really burnt out trying so hard at such a young age.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you won all the awards, but there was a cost, right?
There's a definite cost. There's a definite cost because I don't think, and actually my wife and I were talking about this, I don't think it's healthy for kids to have that much pressure put on them at such a young age. I think it fosters like the sense of like, almost like being timid to like try new things or like learn for the sake of learning. And so honestly, if I had to say for a reason, I think that's like, I think by 10th grade, I was pretty burnt out. Like after like basically trying to maintain that level for a couple of years, I think that was what was like pushing me to be like, I need to change. I need to do something else. And that was like the impetus for me to like seek something different. And being the shy kid I was, obviously I didn't ask around. I wanted to change, and I knew I'd always wanted to go to America. I don't know why that thought was in my brain, but I was like, oh, and it's probably just because like my dad had once probably said like, oh, the next step is America. Like that's where you should go. That's where the best universities are. And probably like every other Asian kid, Harvard is on the picture, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, Harvard does a great job with their branding for sure. There's no question.
Exactly. So I imagine it's probably an offshoot of that planted the seed of America is the next step. And how that conversation came about was
well, hey, before we go there, Tom, tennis, how old were you when you started?
I started when I was like 7, 6.5.
Did you find tennis, or did your parents find tennis for you?
Tennis was one of the offered extracurricular activities after school.
Okay, by the school.
By the school.
And then at what point did you or your parents realize you were good enough to have extra training?
Never.
You did have outside of school tennis.
No, I did. I don't think there was a point where the way you asked the question, there was never a point where we're like, oh, he's pretty good at tennis, we should get him lessons. It was more like, I really loved playing tennis. And there was this, like, all the other kids at school were getting coached by this guy at the tennis courts. And you do private lessons. And it took me, I think, like 6 months or something to muster the courage to ask my dad if he would be able to pay money for those private lessons. Because I mean, like, I went to a rich school, but I definitely wasn't rich. Like, my parents were like basically we were definitely the poorest family there. And they basically like, it'd be kind of, I have this memory of like all the kids would pick me up. All the kids would be picked up, and they would have really fancy cars, and my dad would be still driving what in South Africa we call a bucky, but it's just like a truck. He drove the same bucky that the Queen had given him. and now I'm like, dude, that is so badass. But like back then as a kid, you don't know any better, anyway, so tennis. So I asked my dad, like, can I get lessons with this guy? And he's basically said yes, and that started the course of like allowing me to improve in a sport that I like love deeply. And so over time, I was introduced to like, oh, here's a provincial team, or what we call a state team. Like, let's see if you can play. Can you play on that team? And I have to caveat this, like, I was absolutely garbage at tennis, like compared to everyone else. The only thing going for me at the time was I was Chinese in their eyes, not African. And back then, when apartheid happened, or like when it came off apartheid, every single provincial team and national team required for there to be 2 diversity candidates, if you will, of a 6-person team. So me and my friend Sunday, his name is Sunday, became part of the diversity teams at both the provincial level and the national level. So that's how I, who definitely wasn't on par with everyone else, got a foot into playing highly competitive tennis. And when you start at a young age and you suck, it doesn't matter. You're getting a lot of experience.
Yeah, a ton.
And I think like I was telling someone the other day, I was like, I think for the first season, I lost every match, and it was bad.
That's hard.
But like you can only get better, and like put in enough situation, you're forced to get better. And so by the time I was like what, 10, 11, 12, I was like pretty beastly, given just like part of the system. Every year you do the same thing. You have no option but to be better. So
you got a lot better. So when you were younger, it sounds like you loved tennis from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about tennis that was attractive to you?
Just that's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been posed it that way.
Well, it's an individual sport, right? And so there's something to individual sports that team sports don't have. You can't rely on other people to pick you up. You have to pick yourself up.
I don't know. Like it's like for me, it's like asking the question, like why do kids like little car toys that roll around? You know, maybe some part of me as a 6-year-old just looked at them bouncing the ball up and down. Like when you start learning tennis, you basically have this little racket, and they're basically like, see how many times you can like keep the ball up. And just that moment of magic, you're just like, wow, this is kind of cool. And then like being able to play against someone and like maybe being a bit better than others, that makes you like feel like, oh yeah, I like this sport. Like I think it was probably just happenstance that I picked that as my extracurricular activity and went with it. But yeah, I kind of think like there are things in my life that I just consider magical, and it's very hard to describe. And it may be just that it's this enamorment of like the simple, like the movement, the competitiveness, and just probably I saw someone do it beautifully at some points. So
beauty and magic, what's not to like?
I know, right?
All right, so you became beastly after not winning a game your first season, or a match your first season. Were you on the national team?
Yeah, national team, touring the country, if you will. Touring Africa, I should say.
You were touring the entire continent.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about you had started going down this path. Tell me the story of going to America. Like what was happening in your mind and with your family and all of that, and what led you to finally actually make the move? Because you were young, right? You were 15?
Yeah.
When you actually moved.
Yeah. Or I think the decision to apply was made when I was 14. And it really was just happenstance. It was like I was at this point where I was kind of burnt out from my studies, just working, and totally my fault. Like, I don't know. Like, people are like, "Oh, did your parents put a lot of pressure on you?" And they're like, my parents didn't put any pressure on me, which is I think interesting for an Asian family. And my brothers did not get that same treatment for whatever reason. They had a lot of pressure put on them.
Should we explore that, Tom?
That's a complicated conversation, and I feel like this conversation has gone in many little tangents.
That's what happens on this podcast. It's all good.
But yeah, I just got to a point where I was kind of burnt out, and I felt like I needed some type of escape, and I think it all balled up. And I was saying this earlier. Of course, I didn't know what the options were, and my mom, who I should say that my mom basically her sole thing from, like, she just basically devoted her entire life to me from like the moment I was born, like from like age 6 onwards. Like, she would take me to practices, she would wait for me, she would watch all my matches. So completely devoted mom. And one evening, my mom, so I'm sure they have it here. They have like parents' night where your parents go talk to the teachers, and they say how well you're doing, what things they're having trouble with. And somehow, I think my mom's superpower is not being afraid to ask silly questions or just ask anything, even if at that young age you're like, "Mom, that is the most embarrassing thing to ask." And she just asked, like, "Do you know?" I think she asked my history teacher, or maybe even every teacher she talked to, "Do you know how to send my kid to America?" And one of the teachers basically was like, "Actually, I do. I sent a brother and a sister to a school called Choate Rosemary Hall, like basically like 4 years ago." And that started the process of me applying to Choate, because at Choate there is this history of every 4 years there being a South African on campus. And I think it's tied to just some previous alumni having set up a fund to basically fund, like, that being a requirement to have that donation always exist. So
Choate's, I mean, I'm not up to date on rankings of boarding schools, but Choate's definitely a brand name.
Yeah, I did not know this back then. I think this was just kind of like happenstance. But yeah, Choate is a big brand name. It's known for, back in the day, that all the Ivy Leagues would have high schools that were basically like feeder schools to them. So like Choate, Rosemary Hall. Choate used to be two schools. It'd be a boys' school, Choate, and Rosemary Hall, the girls' school, that came into one. And they were a feeder school to Yale, much like, I think, either it's Phillips Exeter or Phillips Andover that's a feeder to Harvard or whatnot.
I think Exeter is the feeder to Harvard.
Yeah. So so I was introduced to that world, which was kind of an incredible opportunity. And I think academics was like, I think it was like my tennis helped in getting in for sure. But also the academics. So you kind of needed to like hit a certain threshold to meet the criteria.
So your mom was trying to send her oldest child to America. Why? What was it about America? Was it the educational opportunities?
No, I think I had actually asked her, like.
Oh, so it was your idea, and she was a supportive mom pushing for it.
Yeah, I think my mom and I have always been extremely close, and at the time, she could tell I was very unhappy and like kind of depressed, and she was like, "What's the problem?" And I probably had just told her, like, like kind of burnt out, very 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 stressed, I'd like to like maybe just go somewhere else. I think that would probably set things right. And she took that next step to ask the questions like, hey, how do we have those next steps? You know?
I mean, I can't imagine the pressure lessened or subsided going to Choate. I would think there would be as much, if not more, pressure academically anyway.
It was just different, honestly. I probably changed. Yeah, I mean, I would say that the stakes were probably higher, but I think it introduced me to such a different way of life. Like you go from almost like a day school environment where you're basically just being shepherded by your mom around all day. You go to school, you go do like your serious tennis practices, you go home and then you study, to an environment where it's you amongst 800 kids, and you are basically forced to interact with these kids and develop a very intense social life in there.
And you were there 10th through 12th grade?
Yeah, exactly. So 3 years.
That's a hard time to change schools for anybody, but to be a Chinese kid from South Africa moving to Choate in Connecticut?
Exactly.
To an elite boarding school in America? I mean, how did your head wrap around your new?
Oh, it was messed up. It was like hard as hell. I was like really, I was really homesick the first year.
Oh, I bet.
And the decision was made. So the way the South African academic school year is from January through December. So the decision was made for me to actually redo 10th grade, because by the time I was able to go to school in America, I was already halfway through 10th grade. So I was like, okay, let's restart 10th grade, so sophomore year, and then do it. And which was a great decision. I mean, it would have been harder had I gone as a junior and had all the crazy SAT, PSAT pressures put on me from that early on.
Yeah, well, and you're getting used to American culture. Well, and frankly, you're getting used to New England
culture, exactly.
And you're talking about people at Crawford driving nice cars. I imagine Choate put that to a new level.
Yeah. But I think there was more, like Choate had more of a socioeconomic diversity, I should say. Like obviously still very high end, but like definitely more people that I could basically be aligned with.
Got it. So you played tennis at Choate as well?
I played tennis at Choate, yeah.
Okay. All right. So Choate was a feeder school to Yale. I've never asked you this, and this is something I typically ask. Where did you go to college?
I went to a small school called Clara McKenna College.
Okay. Where is that?
Clara McKenna College is in Southern California in a town called Claremont. Wait
a minute. Do you pick parts of the world that are just extremely different from the last place you lived?
Honestly, now I think that was actually part of the decision to go somewhere new. Like South Africa, the South Africa I grew up in was so sunny. Like it was really sunny. It was the air was really dry, and that's just what I knew. And then going to like New England, where you basically could have 4 seasons in one day at any moment, and it's humid, and it's just like, I think at the end of it, I was like, this is great, but I'm going to go somewhere where I think like I'll have sunlight at a reasonable rate. So that was definitely one of the factors. But Clara McKenna is known for a few things, but people mostly know it because it's a consortium. It's one of the few consortiums where there are 5 schools there: Pomona, Pitzer, Harvey Mudd, Scripps, and then Claremont. They combine to form this consortium, and it's the only school I know, only 5 schools that I know that literally they are separated by streets. Like you can pass into Pomona's campus by just crossing a street, and you can actually you can take courses at any of the colleges, and they're independent colleges. you can also, if you could actually graduate with a degree from another college as well.
That's wild, right? That's not typical.
It's very atypical that I've come to know. And I don't know. For me, I think it was maybe not the best choice in schools to make. But I should caveat that honestly, graduating in the financial crisis was also not the best. It wasn't that great for in terms of like scholarships opportunities. Like I kind of got a free ride to go to Choate. I did not get a free ride to go elsewhere afterwards.
Well, I mean, a consortium, are you paying like private school? Were all those private schools or were they state schools?
They're all private school. So you're paying the whatever ridiculous cost it is right now. It's like probably like 55, 60K is what it is.
Yeah, that's an expensive small private school.
Exactly.
Yeah. What were the benefits of the consortium? Were the schools wildly different in your experience?
Oh yeah, 100%. Harvey Mudd. So if Claremont is known for economics, like economics, finance, consulting, like it's very much like it sets you up to be successful in those fields. Harvey Mudd is one of the top engineering schools in the country. I think so. I think they only have like 6 or 7 majors, and there's like mechanical engineering, computer science, physics, or something like that. And I think when I graduated, like Harvey Mudd basically had the best return on investment out of any school in the country. I think like the average starting salary was like really high, like the highest of any school in the US.
Yeah, Harvey Mudd has a national reputation amongst engineers anyway.
Yeah. And then Pomona has always been one of the top liberal arts schools just for the way it conducts itself. So it probably doesn't hurt that like they lure you in to go to this thing called Ski Beach Day, which is basically you go skiing in the morning and then a bus takes you to the beach in the afternoon. Because of the location where the colleges are, you can do both.
So how far from LA?
How far from that? Probably like 40 minutes, an hour. Depends on. So not too far.
So almost basically Metro LA, it sounds like.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's wild. Ski in the morning and do whatever people do at the beach in the afternoon. That's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, no, it's when you're 18 years old or 17, whatever age you go to college, that sounds great, man. And also the quality of life that like my wife who went to Penn. So my wife and I met in high school at Choate, and then we decided to like go to separate schools. She came to visit me a lot during those years, and she would start crying on the way back because like we had world-class food at the dining halls. Like it was unreal. We had like fresh smoothies, everything. It was like the quality of life was almost like too good. Where she would go back to her dorm and her life at Penn and be like, "Wow, what am I doing here?"
Well, so did you? I have a lot of questions about your college experience. Does your diploma say Clara McKenna or does it say Harvey Mudd?
No, it says no. I actually graduated with a degree in economics.
Oh, I thought you would have been computer science or something like that.
No.
Just so it says Claremont.
It says Claremont, yeah.
Okay.
I did a bunch of coursework at Harvey Mudd for the computer science, but at the end of it, basically chose to go econ.
Okay. Which is a science, but I've heard people call it the dark science because it's not quite as clear as other sciences, maybe.
I'd probably agree. Yeah, the economics I learned was almost like mathematics. It's like heavy mathematics. So
a lot of stats, a lot of math.
Yeah.
All right. So why was the food so spectacular? Just because the administration cared so deeply about nutrition and great tasting food for the students? It's unusual. Most
Yes. I have never gone to a place where there's like spit roast. There's like different stations. There's lobster on like special occasions. It's kind of insane. Like like I'll say it out to people, and people just won't believe me. But you kind of have to see it to believe it. And then the only way I can tell, the only story that people believe is like, I had friends who would come visit me in college, and they would come visit me multiple times just for the food. So
I don't know what to make of that, because every college campus I've ever eaten at is nowhere near what you're describing.
yeah, and I mean, and it's enhanced for sure, because you like each campus generally has about 2 or 3 dining halls, and then you times it by 5, so you have 15 different options to go for, and each one is just as good.
There had to be somebody who was unbelievably dedicated that oversaw those 15 dinings.
100%. And then we had this thing at the Claremont called the Athenaeum that basically brought in speakers every day of the week to just speak to the class, to whoever wanted to sign up. And you could any student could basically sign up for the talk, and then go from like 6 to 8 p.m. every night. So, and I used to work there, like doing a few shifts to make some money. But then the food there served was it was like basically a sit down dinner that they brought out 3 courses.
How did you discover this consortium?
Well, at Choate, they basically, when you go through the college application process, they basically ask, and the college council is doing a phenomenal job. So they basically said, hey, and you probably know this is like, you need to select a few safeties, you need to select a few reaches, and then like moderates. And based on my personality and like everything the counselor knew about me, they're like, they asked me questions like, what do you want? And I think my answer was probably like moderate weather, good weather. And they just said, you should consider the consortium. And Claremont was a safety. So it was one of those years where I applied to everything. I think we were limited to, 10 schools which we could apply to. And I only got into safeties. Didn't get into any moderates or like reaches.
College admissions are weird, man.
Hey, man.
They're cyclical and they're just weird.
But I mean, like, would I change it? Probably not. If I had like.
Well, I have 3 kids, 17, 19, and 21. So 2 are in college right now. And I said, your college education, the actual education, is entirely about you and the effort you put into it. Now, schools have brands, right? And
yep.
You're paying a lot of money to have a Harvard degree, and you're getting a fantastic education there, but you're also getting an unbelievable brand. But you can go to some school nobody's ever heard of and have an actual fantastic education.
100%.
Did you know the food was going to be amazing before you applied?
No. It's interesting to me that I didn't even visit Claremont before I went for the first day, and it's the same thing with Choate. Like, it was just like, buy a plane ticket, you're going to the school, and you show up.
Well, the internet existed, right?
The internet existed, obviously, but like, doesn't really describe it.
Yeah, being physically there is different than seeing a picture on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. And like just being able to chat with students and whatnot. And a part of me probably was just not that interested to do that. It was just like, I've done this before. I like save the money. We'll just go We'll just go first day.
Did you feel like you fit in there pretty quickly?
Yeah, I would say so. Like, I think at that point, after having gone to Choate, I felt like I could fit in anywhere, honestly. Choate's environment forces you to be social, which I probably lacked a bit of skills going in. But coming out, I felt very comfortable, and I think that's the only thing that may change. I would probably change if I had to redo it, because Cho was a school of 800 kids. Claremont was a school of 800 kids. It was a bit too comfortable, and I think there is an element of like you should push yourself to grow in those formative years a bit more. So that's the only thing that I would maybe suggest a bit different, or like try be a bit more uncomfortable during those years.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, Tom, but my goodness, you went to Connecticut from South Africa. I mean, that you're putting yourself in an uncomfortable position. For the entire 3 years you were there, and then to go to Southern California from New England. I mean, that's another uncomfortable move.
Yeah, no, I also think it's probably just like this mindset when you're used to doing this, you're always critical. You're like, how could this be better? You're always thinking that.
That's fair.
And at a certain age, you start realizing how ridiculous like you probably sound to the person who's listening to you.
Yeah, I mean, ridiculous wasn't the word I would have chosen, but yeah, I think you're to reach a higher level of discomfort, you'd have to be really, really creative. And I think you also mean within each week, within each month, pushing yourself more and making yourself more uncomfortable, not just the big move from one location to the next.
Exactly. There's different levels of uncomfort here, you know?
Yeah, no doubt. All right. So did you play tennis at Claremont? Did you want to play tennis at Claremont?
Not really.
Yeah. You were kind of done with tennis by the time you graduated?
Yeah, it was a lot of pressure to perform, honestly.
Yeah.
So, and I mistakenly tried to basically say, I was like, no, I've never really not done a sport for any time in my life. So let me do that freshman year in college. What a mistake. I think, yeah, like I gained a bunch of weight and and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm a guy who really needs structure in my life. And so the following year, I basically emailed the head coach of cross country. I was like, hey, how do I make it on this team? And he basically was like, can you run a mile like at this pace? Can you do this? And I basically trained that entire summer to basically try to make the team, and kind of crawled in.
But you made it.
I made it, yeah. So, and then I basically ran cross country and track for the remaining 3 years of college.
So you were like a mid distance and longer distance guy?
Yep. Was I any good? Not at all. They used me as the I like telling my friends they used me basically as the rabbit for girls training.
I mean, everybody has their uses.
No, but it definitely put a lot of structure that I needed during those years.
Well, and you have to be in shape. If you're going to run, 5, 6, 7 days a week, you're going to get in shape too.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. So what was the idea when you graduated college? What did you think you were going to do for a career?
I graduated and I'd always wanted to start my own company. And Claremont has this, I think, a great program where they basically set you up with a mentor in your sophomore year. You basically fill out like, what do I want to do when I graduate college? And they set you up with someone who's done that or is in that field. And so basically he and I started a company right after I graduated.
Oh, wow.
Or like during my school years.
What was the company? What was the idea for the company?
The idea for the company was pretty simple. It was a database that basically kept track of personal information. So the pitch was simple. It was like everyone has pieces of information that they have everywhere. So their name, their phone number, their physical address. And over time, that information changes. wouldn't it be great to basically make sure, like, if you have your phone book in your phone, basically if you were to change a number, that basically gets synced up to everyone.
Mm.
And for the pitch to companies would be like, hey, Costco, you send a lot of mail every year. 50% of that mail basically goes to an outdated address. Wouldn't it be great to basically have this database you could rely upon and sync it up? So at the core, that's the basic idea of it.
Did you become profitable?
No, not at all.
Hard, right?
Oh gosh, it was like 2 years, 3 years of just extreme heartbreak and kind of learning, but mainly heartbreak. And also,
go ahead.
what up?
No, go ahead. No, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say it was like, and I was also very young at the time. Like, I think it's very, very it's very impressive when a person like just graduating from college is able to just make it, like, create their own company and make it successful. Because for me, like, I looking back now, I suggested a few things, and like, no, Tom, you should, like, that made complete sense. You should have been more confident in your assertions during those like stakeholder meetings.
Yeah.
So,
have you tried again since then?
No. I basically closed that down, and basically I was like, well, Tom, you need to get a job. And that was my introduction to Salesforce. Like, I found a job at a company that's built software on top of Salesforce.
Okay.
And kind of have been in that ecosystem ever since. I'd like to try again at some point, but we'll see if that materializes.
Well, you're older and you're wiser, so I mean, I would think you would stand a better chance the second time around.
Yeah, it's a balance, right? It's like, you're older, you're wiser, but I also think there's an element that you need to have of just being young and like blind in a way, and just rush for it head on. Because oftentimes, if you know all the pain that you're going to suffer, have to deal with, you probably wouldn't go there in the first place. And I think as you get older, you consider things a lot more, and you start evaluating. And sometimes the best approach is just to be like, jump in.
Yeah, no, that's right. We many humans overthink.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And I was joking earlier today. I try to underthink as much as I possibly can to avoid overthinking at all costs.
Hey man, at a certain point, yeah, it has to happen. Otherwise, nothing gets done.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Overthinking can lead to being stuck. Mm-hmm. All right. So you've been all over the world mountain climbing. Can you tell me about all things mountain climbing and some of the coolest mountains you've climbed?
Yeah. Nowadays I pretty much spend all my free time rock climbing.
I'm saying mountain, you're saying rock. What's the difference?
Rock climbing is I don't actually know. Like, mountain climbing, I think, has probably a few different variations of that. But in my understanding is that, like, there's like different classes of climbing. So like class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4. And I think once you get to class 4, you start needing like protection to ensure your safety. Whereas like a gentle stroll up the hill is probably considered class 1 scrambling or something. And I basically I primarily only do just like rock climbing where it's category 5. I put my own protection in, or I clip into protection as I go up. And it's something that I've probably dedicated the past 12, 13 years to. And have been able to, it's a pretty small community overall, people who have devoted their entire lives to just pursuing it. So when I was in Connecticut, I made friends with this guy named Chris, and Chris is known for spending his like most of the routes in Connecticut, he put up.
Oh wow.
So it's great to have a guy like that be your primary climbing partner and teacher as well. And so it's this little group of friends that I have in Connecticut and myself, and we've been able to really in recent years just go all over the world and climb. So there are these spots in the world. So like we've been to Spain, we've been to Greece, we've been to Cuba to go climbing, and a bunch of areas in here in the States as well has just world-class climbing. So yeah, it's go
since
ahead.
you mentioned Cuba, Tom, what was it like being in Cuba? I guess trying to get there, being there, and then I didn't realize there was enough three-dimensional relief in Cuba to even climb.
Cuba may have the most three-dimensional. Well, Cuba may have the most inspiring rock I've ever seen, and I think it's unfortunately there are so many restrictions to getting there, but I think that would, if it was easier, it would be a world-class climbing spot. Yeah,
what was it about that rock that was so unbelievable, or so enjoyable?
It's just unreal. Like, imagine like a candelabra. Do you know what a like?
Sure.
And now imagine that's just rock.
Wow.
Right? It's
that's
incredible tufas that are just suspended in air and somehow attached to the wall. And
that's wild.
And you're like literally climbing up one of these things that has been shaped over millions of years. And my understanding is at some point was the ocean floor.
That's wild to think about.
Yeah. And it's the only place where I literally am doing a split like hundreds of feet in the air because it's between two of these huge limestone tufas.
Wow.
And yeah, it's utterly insane.
So when you were mentioning the classes earlier, what's the highest class?
It's tier 5. It's
tier 5. Sorry.
It's what people, when people look at like most people know rock climbing because of like Alex Honnold's Free Solo movie.
Yes, that guy's insane, by the way.
My wife thinks the same. She's like, Tom, you do realize he's like kind of psychopathic? And I'm like, yeah.
I think he has to be.
Well, she was more saying that about his relationship and whatnot, but or like no, it's just like how he processes information and whatnot, and how he has like no risk receptors. But that's when you see people climbing Yosemite and whatnot, that's basically class 5. They put you in protection and whatnot.
You're a professional.
I would say like high amateur.
Well, but that's where, I mean, I don't know if there's such a notion of being a professional rock climber, but if there were, they're in tier 5.
Yeah, no, tier 5 for sure. And actually, it's recently that like, it's only in like, I would say the past decade where people have actually started, like professional rock climbers have been able to make like good money. You know, you have Alex Honnold, who's like won an Oscar now for his short film. But then like rock climbing has like for the first time was in the Olympics. And then now like it's funny, Japan has like some of the best climbing athletes in the world for whatever reason, even though they don't have any rocks there. But
that's weird.
But some of their athletes are like some of the brands that are now sponsoring rock climbing athletes are high fashion brands. So your Gucci, your Cartier, it's a new world.
Didn't see that coming.
I know. So like I consider that to be professional, and for me, it's like a very personal passion project that I'd love to turn into like a full-time thing. But I also really enjoy what I have right now. So.
Yeah, I mean, when you say you're dedicating your free time to it, you obviously are, in love with it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Everybody should have something like that in their lives.
Yeah, I think so. I think something that like basically makes you feel like there's some magic, you know?
Yeah, no, I love it. That's awesome, man. Where's your next trip?
This year I've told all my friends I am gonna stay local. So my stomping ground is this place called the New River Gorge
Yep.
in West Virginia, and then I'm going to go to the Red River Gorge in Kentucky later this year. So those are like probably some of the prime destinations here in the United States.
The New River Gorge, the actual New River,
mm-hmm.
Is known for certain times of year known for amazing rafting. And
yeah. So I try to go there every other week now on the weekends.
That often?
Yeah. It's the season for climbing.
Well, how long of a drive is it?
It's 5.5 hours.
And you're doing that every other weekend?
Yeah. Yeah, it takes a bit of dedication, and like it's nice if you have a friend to like take turns driving the car.
Yeah.
You're pretty wrecked after a full day of climbing.
I bet.
Yeah, no, next year we'll probably try to go to Sardinia. I'd love to make Cuba every year trip. I think I'm so ingrained in the community there, and I love what's being done there, and also like so that's probably going to become a mainstay.
Very cool. Well, we're at an hour 16. Let's close by telling me a little bit more about your wife, how you guys met, and what you guys are up to these days.
Sure. My wife and I met in high school, so end of junior year. We basically made the poor decision of getting together at a point when you're not supposed to, and then basically have been together ever since. We were long distance in college, which I think was a great thing, because otherwise we would have no lives outside each other. But now we both have like an amazing community of friends from those two institutions that we can lean on. She's basically followed this path of a legal career. So after graduating from Penn, she followed me to California, where she got a job at Google, which kind of set her off on her path. She does a lot of stuff under law enforcement requests. So a lot of these tech companies oftentimes request personal information from these tech companies. So law enforcement asks these requests, and she basically responds to these requests. So she was in that capacity, and that's just a major field. And so that led her to go to law school at Yale. And now we're in DC, where she was there. She was at a law firm for a couple of years, and now she's going to the Justice Department. So
she's gonna work for the feds.
I know, right? So she's doing an amazing job. She does not approve of the rock climbing. I should caveat this.
It sounds dangerous.
It's funny. That's like everyone's typical response, and I completely agree.
But you like that aspect of it as well. The danger does something for you?
No. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, because it's really scary. Like that's a possibility, but it's also one of the few things that it's just like, I think I keep on coming back to the things that are just purely magical and just like send a tingle through your spine when you do it. And like the prospect of just being high up in the mountains, trying to go up this rock and almost like solving a problem section by section in a very meditative like trance, and just feeling just like almost completely free. is what the magic is about for me.
So you're thinking about the positive attributes of rock climbing, and it just so happens that it's also dangerous.
It's dangerous. Yeah. It's dangerous. And I think oftentimes I like try to like ask my wife, or like I debate with people. I'm like, I would consider rock climbing to be less dangerous than like one of the most dangerous things I do every day, which is driving my car around.
Yeah, that's probably right.
And so I don't know. That's a long thread, if you will.
No, it's all good. Well, Tom, I hope you enjoyed this.
It was really fun. Thank you.
I enjoyed learning a lot more about you, man. I keep telling myself I'm too old to do something like rock climbing or name another 10 things that are highly physical. But I imagine they would, even in a limited, slow, easy way, it's probably something I could get into.
Definitely, 100%. And the area I live in, DC, is host to a bunch of people who kind of inspire me on a daily basis. There's this person, one of my neighbors is Lou. She's 86, and she believes, like, she read somewhere, what is it? 90 is the new 60. Like, basically she says, like, right now, if you're 90, you're really 60 years old. And by derivative of that, like, if you're 60, you're really 30. She says it in a much more elegant manner, but she kind of blows me away by just how much she does every day.
Yeah, I know guys that are meaningfully older than I am, and their line that is pretty common amongst them is, you got to keep moving to keep the old man at bay, or keep the old man out.
Yeah, gotta use it or lose it, man.
Yeah, that's right. Awesome, Tom. Well, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.